So I wanted to start tonight with a short introduction about the new year, the new Gregorian year, 2025, the significance of 2025, because not coincidentally, I think, it happened to coincide with the last night of Chanukah, which is pretty rare. It's pretty rare that Chanukah goes so late that it enters the new year. So there's that. Plus it's Rosh Chodesh Tevet. Today is the first day of the month of Tevet. So you have the last night of Chanukah, you have the first day of 2025 together. And I think that that's something really special, especially because the eighth night of Chanukah, the last night of Chanukah, is the most important night of Chanukah. That's the climax of the holiday. It has a special name even. What do we call the last night of Chanukah? Right, Zot Chanukah. It's like, this is Chanukah, it's the Chanukah. It's the final, where you have all 8 lights shining brightly. If you like numbers, what's the gematria of Zot Chanukah? Chanukah is 89, and Zot is 408, so it's 497, which is just one above 496, is a well-known number. 496 is Malchut. Malchut is kingdom. Right? It's the last of the Sfirot. It's at the bottom of the tree of Sfirot, and in the big picture, it's the final kingdom, right? The final kingdom of Israel at the end of days, restored Davidic kingdom. And so you have Malchut is 496, and Zot Chanukah is 497. The last night of Chanukah has a very Messianic, redemptive quality. And it happens to be on the first day of January 2025, and we're starting a new year with a lot of interesting things. So much has happened in the past few months and in the past year, and more such amazing events globally are expected to happen soon. In just a few weeks, you have a new president in the United States. That's going to make, for sure, send shockwaves around the world. Hopefully, God willing, also here in the next few months, we'll have a new prime minister. A new prime minister. I think also we might be blind to it, but even technologically, big changes are. If you see how quickly AI, artificial intelligence, is taking over, it's amazing, the things that are happening. One way or another, there are really huge developments coming in the weeks and months ahead. And it comes right as we just finished on Shabbat reading Parashat Miketz. And if you remember, we've been saying this for at least a year already, that Parashat Miketz is the only parsha in the Torah that has a unique mnemonic at the end, where it tells you how many words are in the parsha, right? Every parsha, at the end of the parsha, there's a little siman there. It says this parsha has this many verses, and there's a little siman for that. There's an explanation, a symbolic explanation for it. So every parsha tells you at the end how many verses there are. And there's only one parsha that also tells you not just how many verses there are, but also how many words. And there happens to be in Parashat Miketz 2,025 words, which is really amazing. Why is that? This little Masoretic note, they call it, has been in Chumashim for centuries. So why is it that for all these centuries, even hundreds of years ago, Jews were reading their Chumash, and it says at the end of Parashat Miketz that this parsha has 2,025 words? Why does that matter? So the Vilna Gaon gave one explanation, and the Torah Tmima says this as well, that it's connected to Chanukah, because Parashat Miketz is always read on Chanukah, or right around Chanukah. In most years, it's read on Chanukah. There's a connection between this parsha and the holiday of Chanukah. And so the Vilna Gaon says this, that on Chanukah we light 8 candles. The numerical value of candle or lamp, ner, is nun reish is 250. And on Chanukah we light 8 lamps. So if you do 250 times 8, the total value, the total numerical value of the 8 candles is 2,000. Right? 250 times 8, it's 2,000. And when does Chanukah start? Chanukah starts on the 25th of Kislev. So 25th of Kislev, you light 8 lights, it's 2,000, 2,025. That's what the Vilna Gaon said a couple of hundred plus, almost 300 years ago. Okay, so what? Yeah, it's cute, but so what? Rabbis have been grappling with this. Why does this parsha specifically say 2025 words? It's a one connection, like the Vilna Gaon says, and I don't want to discredit it or belittle it. It's a cool numerical equivalence. That Parashat Miketz we always read on Chanukah. There's some themes that overlap with Chanukah. Okay, and it has 2025 words. But I think that all along, for centuries, there's been a prophetic, symbolic connection to Parashat Miketz having 2025 words, because Miketz literally means from the end. Ketz means end, and you see the term Ketz Yamim, end of days, throughout Jewish texts. So I believe there's also a deeper connection there to the end of days. And the parsha is really about the reconciliation of Yosef and his brothers. After being separated for 22 plus years, Yosef and the brothers come back, or the brothers see Yosef again for the first time. That's what we read last Shabbat. So they still don't know that he's Yosef, but now they're back together, or the process of them reuniting, and that process of reconciliation begins in Parashat Miketz, which I think is symbolic of what we're expecting at the end of days now, with all of the house of Israel, all the lost tribes, all the wayward children, and all those that are connected, that are not connected in Israel, outside of Israel, all the different Jews from around the world coming together, reuniting at the end of days. So it's like we're replaying on a national level what was happening in Parashat Miketz. And Vayigash. We're transitioning this week to Vayigash, where Yosef's identity is revealed, and the brothers are now reunited in love and harmony and so on, and they forgive each other and so on. So hopefully that's what's to come. And it specifically says Miketz Shnatayim, which I think is all the more significant, because Miketz, that's how the parsha starts, that these events happen 2 years later, 2 years after Yosef interpreted the dreams of the two servants of Pharaoh in prison. And then 2 years later, these events happen, that Pharaoh is having this recurring dream. And then they take Yosef out of prison because he's known as this powerful dream interpreter. So it says Miketz Shnatayim. And I just think, again, applying that to what we're living through right now, we've been in a period now of these last almost 2 years, of very intense years for Israel and for the Jewish people. It started on October 7, 2023, maybe even earlier, with the almost near civil war that was going on in Israel before that. And this year, in 2025, we're approaching that 2-year anniversary now of October 7, 2 years later. So I think that's also, there's a symbolic Miketz Shnatayim, that Parashat Miketz has 2025 words, and the year 2025 will mark 2 years of this period that we've been in. This really bizarre and tragic on the one hand, but also I think we can see a lot of miracles and a lot of amazing changes in the world on the other hand. So there's that Miketz Shnatayim connection. We also read the Haftarah of Miketz from the book of Zechariah, where the Jewish people come back during the Second Temple times, and God shows Yoshua Cohen a vision of the menorah. And he says, God promises there that he will send, he tells Yoshua, I will say, Shmana Yoshua Kohen Agadol, Ki Anshei Mofet Hema, they are men worthy of miracles. And he says, God promises, Hineni Maviet Avdi Tzemach, I will send you my servant Tzemach. Who is this Tzemach? Right, we interpret that to mean that it's an allusion to Mashiach, because one of the titles of Mashiach is Tzemach, the sprout, the branch, the sprout of the Davidic dynasty. So there's a promise in the Haftarah of Hanukkah that God will send his servant Tzemach. And Tzemach, the numerical value of Tzemach is 138, which is a number we've seen before. It's a number, again, associated with Messianic times. We saw recently that Tzemach is the gematria of Lebanon. Right? Lebanon is 138. Tzemach is 138. Lebanon is 138. Lebanon is also a title for the temple. The temple was called Lebanon because, first of all, the simple reason is because the temple in Jerusalem was built with cedars of Lebanon, with trees from Lebanon, but also because the Gemara says it was Malbin Chat'ei Israel, that it would whiten the sins of Israel. The temple affected atonement for the people of Israel. That's on the surface level, but Levanon also represents, as we've said several times recently, Lev is Lamed Bet Netivot Chochmah, the 32 paths of wisdom, and Nun is Nun Sha'arei Binah, the 50 gates of understanding. And there's this idea of Mashiach as having mastery of these two domains, and that's what allows him to be this person, this renewed king of Israel. So there's Levanon, and there's Tzemach, and there's 138, and it's this number. And when you spin your dreidel, by the way, this is alluded to in the dreidel itself, because you might think of the dreidel as just a toy, but everything in Judaism has symbolic meaning. What does it say on the dreidel? What 4 letters? So it's either Nes Gadol Hayasham or Nes Gadol Hayapo, right? A great miracle happened there. If you live here, then it's there. And if you live there, then you say here. Right? In Israel, the dreidel is Nes Gadol Hayapo. And if you look at those 4 letters, Nes Gadol Hayapo, Nun is 50, Gimel is 3, Hey is 5, Pei is 80, it's 138. The dreidel, the value of the 4 letters on the dreidel is 138. Like Tzemach, which is mentioned in the Haftarah of Chanukah, which is an allusion to the Messianic age, to Mashiach. And then if you're here and your dreidel says Nes Gadol Hayasham, what's the value of that? Nun 50, Gimel 3, Hey 5, and Shin is 300. So what's Nes Gadol Hayasham? 358. What's 358? Mashiach. 358 is Gematria of Mashiach. So either way, whether you're spinning the dreidel in Israel or outside of Israel, both numbers, 138 and 358, are numbers that represent Mashiach, interestingly enough. So even down to the dreidel, Chanukah has a lot of symbolism of Mashiach, of end of days. Of course, restoring the divine light, Or Haganuz, the divine light of creation. We've seen the Midrash before that God has hid that light for the generation of Mashiach, and that divine light of creation will be revealed in the generation in our days, God willing, in the days of Mashiach. So it's all connected to redemption. So having Chanukah at this time with Parashat Miketz, with 2025, it's all really coming together for us. So hopefully we're going to see big miracles. And of course the big question is, why would it encode according to a secular year? Why didn't it say 5785? That's the Jewish year. Why 2025?
Because it involves the goyim, whatever can happen.
Yeah, the truth is because 2025 is the way that the world counts years. It's based on a Christian thing, but it's no longer has anything to do with Christianity now. It's just 2025 CE, Common Era, and the whole world has adapted it. They celebrate it everywhere. Whether it's in China or in Dubai and all these other peoples who have their own calendars. There's an Arabic calendar, a Muslim calendar, there's a Chinese calendar, but everybody commemorates this year as a kind of global, international year, a secular year devoid of other significance. And since the whole world keeps this numbering, so does Hashem. That's what Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev said. I shared this story once before, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe would, on some occasions, was known to wish people a Happy New Year on January 1st. Now, the truth is that's not so strange, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe came from Russia, and in Russia, everybody celebrates a New Year. It's not a religious thing. It's like a big public holiday, and even for my family growing up, it was always like a big deal. In Soviet Russia, this was a big holiday. It did not have any religious significance. So anybody from the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire before it, it's quite normal to wish somebody a Happy New Year, devoid of any religious significance, just as a new secular year. So, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe, coming from the Russian Empire himself, would sometimes wish people a Happy New Year. And when people asked him why, he quoted Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who was one of the great early Hasidic masters, based on a verse in Psalm. He would wish people a Happy New Year for January 1st. And it's based on a verse in Tehillim, in Psalm 87, where it says, Hashem ispor bichtov amim, that God counts in the register, in the counting system of the nations of the world. So if the nations of the world follow a particular counting system, okay, so then God also follows that counting system. It has sanction from above that if this is what the world counts in, then in the heavens they also have a clock that counts in this way. Like those clocks on the walls in like the old news outlets and in airports and in journalist offices where you have all the clocks, Jerusalem time, New York time, London time. So in heaven, they also have all the different clocks. They have the Chinese calendar, they have the Muslim calendar, they have the Hebrew, they have all the different clocks, what year it is, and according to every nation. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says that's what it means that Hashem yispor b'chtov amim, that God counts also according to the register, according to the counting system of all the nations of the world. So there is a place for using the secular dating system, and it's not so strange that Parashat Miketz would have perhaps an allusion to 2025 to the secular dating system. And actually, in other places in Jewish texts, you do see use of the Gregorian calendar, or whatever you want to call it, what it used to be the Julian calendar, the Roman calendar, the Christian calendar. So one example, I'll just give you one interesting example, is the Zohar. The Zohar was published in the year 1290 CE. The year 1290 CE, which was 50-50 on the Jewish calendar. 50-50. They weren't sure whether they should publish it. They were 50-50 at the time. Should we reveal it? Should we not? Right, so we say that these are the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Goes back 2,000 years. Rashbi lived 1,800, 1,900 years ago, right? Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Zohar is the collected teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his mystical circle, that era around 1,900 years ago. So why did they keep it hidden? The tradition is that they passed it on in secret manuscripts, in secret teachings from rabbi to student. And then in the 13th century, the mystical circle of Rabbi Moshe de Leon in Spain, they published the Zohar in the year 1290. Why did they publish it then? After 1,000 years of this information being kept hidden, why did they publish it? If you have the book Garments of Light, the volume 3, I did a whole essay of when and why the Zohar was published. When it was, there were various social and religious reasons for why it was specifically published in 1290. I'm not going to go through those now. What I do want to go through, if you have the book, you can look up that essay. But what I do want to focus on is the Zohar itself explains why they published it in 1290. The Tikkunei Zohar in particular. There's one section of the Zohar. The Zohar is like 20 different books and midrashim and manuscripts that were put together. So one of the big ones is Tikkunei Zohar. And the Tikkunei Zohar in the introduction says why it was published in 1290. Because the Ketz de Furkana, again I use the word Ketz, the end of days of the redemption, the final redemption, is comes from the place of truth, of Emet. And it says in the prophet Micha, Titen Emet leYaakov. Right? You remember this verse? Give truth to Yaakov, and then Chesed leAvraham. And the siman, this is a siman, 1290. Emet, the Zohar says the word Emet, truth, stands for 1290, 1290. That's how it begins. Titen Emet leYaakov, give truth to Jacob, bring truth at the end of days, destroy all the evil and falsehood and lies in this world of Alma de Shikra, in this world of lies. Bring truth to the world. Truth, Emet, is 1290, is 1290. That's the first thing that it says. And then it continues, because we say in Psalms, Lada'at be'eretz darkecha, that throughout the world God's ways should be known. Ufachi eretz, and this too, eretz is elef ratz. What is elef ratz? Aleph is 1,000, and reish tzadi is 290. So the word eretz also has a value of 1290. Because remember, aleph can be a 1 or a 1,000. Aleph is the first number in the Hebrew numerical system and the last number. Because there's 27 symbols in Hebrew. Aleph through Taf is 1 to 400. Then Kaf Sofit is 500. Mem Sofit can be 600. Nun Sofit 700. Pei Sofit 800. Tzadi Sofit 900. And then you're back to the Aleph. Aleph is 1,000. So the word Aretz also is 1290. If you count Aleph as 1,000, which is literally what it means. Aleph means 1,000. So Ladat be'aretz darkecha, for us to know God's ways, Aretz is also 1290. And also, lekayama behon, and to fulfill what is written, Emet me'eretz titzmach. It says also in Tehillim, Emet me'eretz titzmach. That's truth will sprout forth from the earth. Again, the word tzemach is here. Tzemach. Emet titzmach. And so, Emet me'eretz titzmach. Emet is 1290, and me'eretz, eretz is also 1290. So you have 12. The Zohar gives you a few different verses to spiritually allude to the fact that 1290 will be the year when new truth should enter the world. That's how the Zohar is justifying publishing the secret teachings in the year 1290. Saying, you see, 1290 was alluded to all along in the Tanakh, in Psalms, and in other places, in Micha. The prophets secretly encoded the number 1290, that this secret teaching should be revealed in the year 1290. So even the Zohar uses the secular calendar in a prophecy. So it has validity. So I think, again, for Parashat Miketz 2025, it does have a certain validity to it. And connecting it now also to the Chinese calendar, we did the class on the Chinese zodiac a while ago. Maybe you forgot it. It's been a long time. But if you remember, what's the Chinese zodiac year coming up? The Chinese New Year starting also soon. We're about a month away from the Chinese New Year. What's the new Chinese year? It's going to be the year of the snake, which is a really specifically special year because the snake has a lot of symbolism, again, to the whole Mashiach connection. The snake in the Garden of Eden, the snake that tempted Adam and Eve to consume from the tree of knowledge. And specifically, the Chinese zodiac animals, it's not just the animal, there's also element. There's also 5 elements. There's metal, there's fire, there's water. And this happens to be the wood snake. Wood is etz. Right? So I think it's further symbolic of the snake associated with the tree. This is the tree snake. This year is going to be the tree snake. So we always say that just as the Nachash in the Garden of Eden through the tree caused mankind to be expelled from the Garden of Eden, and the whole idea of the Messianic age that we're working towards, that Mashiach leads the people back into the Garden of Eden, and the numerical value as well. If you remember, Nachash, Nun, Chet, Shin is 358. So the mathematical precision, again, that Mashiach is 358, Nachash is 358. Nachash caused mankind to be expelled from the garden. And the counter figure at the end of days is Mashiach to bring the people back into the garden. And they're both numerically 358 because they balance each other out. And if you remember, the snake is actually a symbol of Mashiach, going all the way back to Moshe in the wilderness with his serpent staff, his staff before Pharaoh, if you remember, even before that. When Moshe first met God at Sinai, God told him, Moshe asked for a few signs to show to the Jewish people that he is God's redeemer. And God said, throw your staff on the ground, and his staff turned into a snake. So going all the way back to Moshe's first encounter at Mount Sinai, he had a staff that turned into a snake. And if you remember, there's in the constellations, in sidereal astrology, there's a 13th zodiac sign. And the 13th zodiac sign is Ophiuchus, the snake holder, the snake bearer. And it's in the stars are in the shape of a person grabbing a snake. And that's another constellation, the serpent's constellation. So there's even in the stars, there's this astrological sign of Mashiach is Ophiuchus, this person holding a serpent snake. So the fact that we're approaching a year of the snake is pretty amazing. And you find in recent history the year of the snake had a lot of significance. Many years of snakes had significance. 2001 was the year of the snake. 9/11. Think about how it transformed the world. 12 years before that, 1989 was the year of the snake. And remember, 1989 is when the Soviet Union collapsed. And again, huge changes in the world. And we've seen before how on the cosmic clock, our sages said already thousands of years ago that civilization as we know it will last 6,000 years. We're in the year 5785. In 1989, we started the year 5750. 5750 was exactly 700 years from the Zohar's publication. The Zohar was published in 5050. In 5750, there's this old prophecy that's the beginning of the final starting point for the end of days for Ikvat HaMashiach, because that's noon on Friday in the cosmic clock. If you remember, every day is 1,000 years. So you have a week Civilization as we know it lasts a week. So if every day is 1,000 years, if you do the math, 250 years is 6 hours. So 6 hours before Shabbat, which is high noon on Friday, as we start getting ready for Shabbat, that would correspond to the year 5750. And in 5750, you had all these incredible things that happened. The fall of the Soviet Union was one, but many other things. The start of the World Wide Web, the start of the Human Genome Project, the first GPS satellite in space. There were the Tiananmen Square protests in China that changed China, that shifted China into another direction. Like so many different things happened that year in 1989 that just fits with this ancient prophecy of the cosmic clock of 5750. That was the year of the snake too, 1989.
What was the element back then?
I believe earth snake. If I remember correctly, off the top of my head, 1989 was an earth snake. We'll check. If I'm wrong, I'll delete this, what I just said. If I'm right, I'll keep it because it'll be so impressive. So 89 was also a significant year. The Gematria of Chanukah, we said, is 89. Now, what's amazing is how does this all connect to our Parsha and Chanukah specifically? The whole year of the snake thing and 2025 starting. This all has to connect. And there is an amazing connection which was given by the Ben Ish Chai. Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, great Iraqi rabbi, sage. Throughout history, rabbis have always been trying to find where in the Chumash or in the Tanakh is there an allusion to Chanukah. Because Chanukah is the only holiday that has no scriptural basis. Right? Every other holiday has something in Tanakh to support it. Right? Tisha B'Av is the temple destruction. That's described in Tanakh. Purim, that's Megillat Esther. There's a book in Tanakh that describes Purim. We have a scriptural, biblical source for every holiday, except Chanukah. Chanukah is from the apocryphal books, from the book of Maccabees, but it's not in Tanakh. So throughout history, rabbis have been looking for a source in Tanakh for Chanukah. And there are many. You can find dozens of references to Chanukah secretly encoded somewhere in Tanakh. You can find many references to Chanukah. The Ben Ish Chai gives one of them. There's an amazing reference from Bamidbar again. They were in the wilderness, and it says, "V'shalach Hashem ba'am et hanachashim asrafim," that God sent venomous snakes, and they attacked the people. The people were complaining. The people were, again, not having faith in God, and God sent venomous snakes. Vayamot amrav me'Yisrael, that many Israelites were killed. God sent venomous snakes. Sarafim, they're called nachashim sarafim. What saraf means? Nachash is a snake.
Saraf is with the word serpent.
Good, true. So the word saraf is believed to be the root of the English word serpent, or really the Latin word serpent, which has the same SRP root. Correct. But saraf literally means burning, because the idea of a venomous nachashim sarafim means venomous snakes that their venom would burn. It feels like burning when you're bit by the snake. So the Ben Ish Chai looks at the verse, 2 verses down from this. The verse says, "Vayomer Hashem," God told Moses, El Moshe, "Aseh lecha saraf," make for yourself this viper, this venomous snake thing out of copper. Vesimoto al nes, and put this venomous copper snake on a pole. Nes means a pole or a sign. It's the same as the word for a miracle. A miracle is called a nes because it's a sign from God. And an actual pole in Hebrew is a nes, because you would hold it up as a sign. So God told Moshe, make a saraf, a copper snake, wrap it around a pole, a nes, and then anybody who's bitten by the snakes will look at this serpent staff and they will be healed. The Ben Ish Chai says this is Chanukah. What does this have to do with Chanukah? What do you see? Where do you see Chanukah here? Look what it says. It says God told him 3 things. There's 3 key words here. The first is saraf, which is burning. The second is nes, a sign, a pole. And the third is whoever sees it will live, v'chai. When we light candles on Chanukah, on the first night of Chanukah, what do we say? We say three blessings. One blessing on lighting on the fire, that's saraf. The next blessing, she'asa nisim la'avotenu, for the miracle, that's the nes. And the third blessing, she'chiyanu. Anybody who sees them, v'chai, and will live. Right? So the Ben Ish Chai says, this pasuk alludes to Chanukah and the three blessings of Chanukah. One for the fire, one for the miracle, one for life. The three things that God told Moses. Amazing. But more than that, look at the letters again, the acronym. Saraf is a shin. Nes is a nun. And Chai is a chet. What does that spell? Nachash, again, which is again Mashiach. It's again 358. And it all comes together again. And the Ben Ish Chai points this out, something really amazing. So hopefully it's just another sign of Chanukah and the year of the snake, and the snake, the serpent staff, as a healing staff. That's actually, some people say that's where the symbol of the healing staff comes from on ambulances, right? The medical symbol of a staff with a snake wrapped around it. Some say its earliest origin is this, the healing staff of Moshe, the Nachash and Nechoshet. So hopefully we will see that this year, God willing, will be a healing year. Two more tie-ins to the year 2025. One is Rosh Chodesh Tevet. The other is, if you're following Daf Yomi, which is the Talmud learning cycle, right? There's a 7.5-year Gemara learning cycle. If you want to finish the whole Gemara from start to finish, there's a 7.5-year cycle. If you do one double-sided page every day, you'll finish in 7.5 years. So if you're following with the Daf Yomi cycle, we just started a new tractate. What's the new tractate? Anybody? Nobody's doing Daf Yomi? Just me? Right, we just started Sanhedrin. Right? The Daf Yomi cycle we just started a couple of weeks ago is Sanhedrin. And Sanhedrin's all about judgment. Sanhedrin is the high court, the supreme court in ancient times in Israel that doesn't exist today. But until it was disbanded, there used to be, until about 1600 years ago, a Sanhedrin, a high court, the supreme court of the top rabbis would sit on the Supreme Court. And there's a whole tractate discussing judgment and courts. And the first Mishnah there is all about the different types of courts that are needed to adjudicate different types of crimes and cases. So you might have a court of 3 judges for the lowest crimes and petty crimes and monetary disputes and small claims. You just need a court of 3 judges. And then if it's more serious than that, you have 23 judges. And for the most serious and the more kind of national things, you need 71, right? Sanhedrin of 70 plus the president, you need 71. That's the high Supreme Court, is the Sanhedrin. So when we're talking about 2025 and transitioning towards a judgment day, it's very appropriate that the tractate specifically that we're starting to study now is all about judgment. And it's connected to Rosh Chodesh Tevet, because in Sefer Yetzirah, this ancient mystical text that we have even before the Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah teaches us that each month of the Hebrew calendar has its own quality. There are 12 key aspects of life, or qualities of life, and each month of the Hebrew calendar corresponds to one of those qualities. Also to one of the 12 tribes of Israel, also to a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, also to the constellations, to the zodiac constellations, the astrological signs. They all parallel, all 12s parallel. So the quality of the month of Tevet is called rogez, which is anger. That's the quality of the month. Kislev, we just finished the month of Kislev. The quality of Kislev was sleep. Because Kislev is the darkest month of the year. It's the shortest days, lots of darkness. It's like hibernation time. Kislev was sleep time. And there's deeper meanings to what does that mean, sleep? What is this quality of sleep? But now we've transitioned. We just started Tevet. We're waking up now. We're out of sleep and we're into rogez, which is anger, but not in a bad way. Each of these qualities can be used for good and for not good. Each quality has positive and negative. Sleep is healing and necessary, but it can also be a waste of time if you overdo it. And it can also be laziness and sloth and sleeping too much. It's also not good. Each quality has a positive and a negative. So what's the positive of rogez, of anger? The positive of anger is what we would call righteous indignation. When you're angry for a good reason. When you're angry because you see something wrong with the world and you want to fix it. It's righteous indignation. And that's tied into judgment. Because ultimately judgment is a person does something wrong. And so there's a need to, God is then stoking his righteous indignation to fix the world. That's the judgment day. Judgment day, God's judgment day, is described throughout the prophets as a day of righteous indignation. That God's wrath will be aroused, but not in a bad way, in a way of judgment, of bringing justice to the world, of rebalancing the scales. So it's all connected to Sanhedrin and to the new month, which we just started today, and to the new year. And in Sanhedrin, what's amazing, we've quoted it many, many times. I think we quote it like in every class, because Sanhedrin is the one place in the Gemara that specifically talks about Mashiach and the end of days. There are a few places in Tanakh that mention the end of days, but the one that almost has an entire chapter about it, about resurrection of the dead, about who is Mashiach, what's going to happen at the end of days. That's the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin. We've quoted it many times about Mashiach being at the gates of Rome and being a leper and doing all these, and there will be 3 Romes, right? 3 Romes will fall, and then there won't be a 4th Rome. All these prophecies, and that's the world will last, as civilization as we know it will last 6,000 years. All of that's in Sanhedrin. And all the discussion of what is the resurrection of the dead, who will be resurrected, who won't be, all of that is in Sanhedrin. In the Mishnah Sanhedrin, it's the 10th chapter, but interestingly enough, in the Gemara, they flip the chapters around. So in the Gemara, it's the last chapter. The Talmud that comments on the Mishnah leaves all of this Messianic stuff to the very end, to its last pages. And it starts on page 90, which is actually page 89. Because there's never a page 1 in the Gemara. When you open a tractate of Gemara, the first page is always page 2. The pshat is probably because page 1 is the title page. Right? The front page, the cover page is page 1, and then you open to page 2. Like when you open a novel, like it often doesn't start on page 1. It starts on like page 15 or whatever, because there's all these other pages before with all the legal stuff and the cover and whatever. So the cover page is page 1, but the Gemara itself always starts on page 2. The deeper reason is because the Torah also starts with 2. The Torah starts with a bet, with Bereshit. It starts with a bet, not an aleph. And the sages say it doesn't start with an aleph because aleph already existed. Aleph is 1. Aleph is the oneness of God. God was already there. So the Torah starts with, creation starts with bet, with Bereshit. So the Gemara mirrors that every Gemara starts with a bet, with page 2, not page 1. So really, all the Messianic stuff in Sanhedrin starts on page, which is the 89th page. Page 90, but it's the 89th page, which is Chanukah again. And right at the very beginning, or very close to the beginning, it gets into a discussion it brings into the discussion Alexander the Great, of all people, without whom Chanukah would be impossible. Because Chanukah is all about the Jews fighting the Seleucid Greeks. Seleucus was one of the generals of Alexander. After Alexander the Great died, his empire fractured into pieces, and Seleucus got Syria, and so that leads to the Seleucid Greeks, who the Maccabees were fighting against. So there's again a connection to Chanukah right at the beginning of this last chapter of Sanhedrin. And even more significant for what's happening in the world today, what is the story of Alexander the Great there? If you remember history a little bit, Alexander the Great he came from Europe, Macedonia, Greece, right? He went across Turkey, and then he came down south along where Israel is, right? Conquered Tyre, got Jerusalem. Then he continued to Egypt. And then after Egypt, he went east and went to Persia, and then even further to Central Asia, eventually even to India, before his army was very restless and couldn't take it anymore. He wanted to go all the way to the end of the world, but then they had to come back. And on his way back, he got sick with something and he died. So the Gemara says here that after Alexander the Great conquered Israel and then was in Egypt, a bunch of Egyptian peoples came to him for judgment. And it lists three different cases of people living in that region that approached Alexander the Great and took the Jews to court. And Alexander was the judge. And what did these people claim? One of those people claimed that Alexander should give them the land of Israel because it is theirs. The Jews don't belong in Israel. The Jews are foreign occupiers. Israel does not belong to the Jews. There were certain people from Africa that lived in that area, and they claimed, they came to Alexander the Great and said, no, we're the real descendants of the Canaanites, and this is the land of Canaan originally, and this land is ours. The Jews don't belong here. They're foreign occupiers. And ultimately, one of the sages comes before them. His name is Gvia ben Psisa, and he proves he's able to outmaneuver them. He's saying, how do you know that, who said that this is your land? They are claiming that they're Canaanites. He says, okay, how do you know? And they say, well, the Torah itself says so. The Torah says that we're Canaanites. So he says, okay, fine. So you accept the authority of the Torah, but the Torah also says that God kicked out the Canaanites and replaced them with the Jews. And that the land of Israel now belongs to the people of Israel, not the Canaanites. And more than that, the Torah says the Canaanites have become a cursed people and they should be servants. So Gvia ben Psisa said, you're not our servants. If you're accepting the validity of the Torah and you're saying that you're descended from these people, these Canaanite people, then you should also accept this, that the Torah says that you were expelled and that you're supposed to be servants. So Alexander said, okay, take 3 days, come back with your response. And they didn't come back, and that was the end of it. And there's 3 such groups that come and say, another group of Egyptians said the Jews owe us money. Because if you remember when the Israelites came out of Egypt, it says they took money from the Egyptians and stuff and clothes and things. So they say they never gave it back to us. We want it back. And Gvia ben Psisa said, yeah, but they were servants for you for centuries. What about their wages? Did you ever pay them their wages? Let's count how much you owe them in lost wages. So it's a little comical, but the point is that here in the Gemara, in Sanhedrin, they're telling you that this is not a new story, that foreigners are coming and trying to convince the world that, no, the Jews don't belong in this land. This is really our land, and trying to take it away from us. It's here in Sanhedrin as well, that even in the time of Alexander the Great, 2,300 years ago, this was happening. And to connect it to the new year, and this is the last one, what we were just learning now in the last few days, there was a long discussion in the Gemara, so tying into this week, to the week of Parashat Miketz and the start of 2025. This is something pretty amazing. There was a long discussion of what happens if a man marries a woman and she's supposed to be a virgin, and then after the wedding, he comes to court claiming that she's not a virgin. The Torah talks about it. It's in Dvarim. It's in Sefer Dvarim, in Deuteronomy. And the Gemara is, first of all, asking how many judges do you need for such a case? And all the different possibilities of what might happen and what kind of witnesses do you need? How do you even have witnesses in a case like this? And all kinds of things like that. That's what the Gemara is discussing. Now, what does the Torah say? If a man claims that the woman was not a virgin, but she can prove that she was a virgin, the Torah says, that the people, the elders of that city, the judges, should take that man and they should flog him. He gets lashes. The punishment of the man who wrongly calls a daughter of Israel not a virgin is to be lashed. And then the next verse says, "Ve'anshu oto mea kesef," and he has to pay 100 pieces of silver to the girl's household, le'avia na'ara, to the father, because the father is the one that arranged the wedding. The father is basically giving his daughter to marry this man. So it's also, he was motzi shem ra, he was slandering the daughter, a holy daughter of Israel, and he is slandering her father. He gave a negative view on the father. So he also pays kesef, he gives 100 pieces of silver to the father. Ki otzi shem ra al betulat Israel, because he slandered a virgin of Israel. Velo tihiyeh leisha lo yuchal leshalcha kol yamav. And then he can never divorce her. He's not allowed to divorce her now, unless she wants to. Well, she doesn't have to be stuck with him if she doesn't want to be. But he can't divorce her now. That's his punishment. That's what the Torah says. That's what needs to happen. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin is discussing this particular case of a slander of a motzi shem ra. What's amazing is that verse, "Velakhu ziknei ha'ir ha'ih et ha'ish ve'yisru oto," the elders, the judges of that city should take that false slander and slash him. Lash, not slash. And lash him, flog him. Guess what the gematria of that verse is? 2025. It's actually 2025. Okay. The value of this verse, the numerical value in total of this verse is 2025. About flogging a slanderer, somebody who slanders a daughter of Israel. Now, why is this symbolic for us where we are as a nation at the start of 2025? The numerical value of this verse is 2025. Because if this term, Betulat Israel, that's mentioned here, what does this term mean in Tanakh? Later in Tanakh, throughout the prophets, who is the Virgin of Israel? Who is the bride of Israel? The people of Israel, right? Throughout Tanakh, God calls us his bride. It's like he married us, but then oftentimes we went astray. We are the straying wife. And then he takes us back. And throughout Tanakh, you see this metaphor always used. And God says, unlike a man who would for sure divorce you already, I always take you back. I always have mercy on you. I love you so much, I take you back. Which even a human man would never do. He would have already thrown you out a long time ago, but I don't. Right? This is a constant common metaphor throughout Tanakh. And in Hosea chapter 2, it's very explicit. The whole chapter, you should really read it. You need a whole class on this chapter because it says a lot of what's happening in the world today. And God specifically says there that I'm going to take you back no matter what. And in the end of days, I'm going to take you back and then you will never cheat on me again. And Ve'aya bayom ha'u, in that day, Na'um Hashem, God says, Tikri ishi velo tikri li od ba'ali. You will call me ishi, my man, and not ba'ali, my husband. Because in Hebrew, the word for a husband, ba'al, literally is an owner. Right? If a woman says ba'ali, my husband, it literally means my owner. Because the husband technically purchases his wife. Right? When he signs the ketubah, it's like he acquires her as his. So it's like he owns her. I know this is not politically correct in the 21st century, but throughout history, a man would acquire his wife. So he is her ba'al. He is her owner, ba'ali. But today, in modern Hebrew, it's actually become very common in Israel for women not to say ba'ali, to say ishi. I don't know if you've heard it before, but that's actually become common.
That's the woke.
Right, or they'll say that, but for a husband, what's that? The woke? Okay, so for the woke, but it has a basis in Tanakh. Yes, it's true that it's used more among liberal Israelis. Well, they will say ishi instead of ba'ali, and it has a source in Tanakh because God says a day will come when you won't call me your owner, ba'ali, but you'll call me ishi, as if we're going to be equals. We're going to love each other equally, like in a proper romantic relationship where we see each other as ish ve'isha and not as ba'al and owner and property. Of course, there's a play on words here. What's the play on words? Avodah Zarah, because one of the Canaanite gods, the main Canaanite deity was Baal, right? And in the Torah, all the different Canaanite pagan idols, they often have Baal in their name. Baal Tzafon, Baal Zvuv, right? Baal this, Baal that. So Baal also in Canaanite, in Hebrew it just means an owner. But for the Canaanites, Baal was their chief deity. And in Tanakh, when the Israelites would sometimes, go astray and worship idols, they would go to the Baalim. So God is also, this is a play on words here, because God is also saying, you're not going to confuse me with Baal anymore. Right? We're going to have this perfect relationship. And ultimately, there's the verses there that it's customary to say these verses when you put on tefillin, ve'erestich li leolam, right? That I will betroth you to me forever. Ve'erestich li betzedek, I will betroth you to me in justice, chesed, rachamim, and so on. Be'emunah, ve'adat et Hashem, and then you will know God forever. So this is probably one of the main chapters in Tanakh that explores that relationship of Israel as the bride and God as the husband. One of the most beautiful things in this metaphor, you've probably heard before that at Mount Sinai was like our chuppah, right? And the Torah was like our ketubah. And we stay up all night on Shavuot as well, just like a bride is excited the day before her wedding and doesn't sleep all night. And in biblical times, a bride was adorned with 24 ornaments. Isaiah Yeshayahu lists them all. Bracelets and anklets and whatever it is, the veil and the tiara, and there were a corset and a dress and like all the things. There were 24 things that a bride would wear. And the Zohar says, what are the 24 ornaments of the Jewish people as the bride? How did God ornament us? And the Zohar says it's the 24 books of Tanakh. The Tanakh has 24 books. That's our ornaments, as we are the bride, Israel. And throughout Tanakh, Israel is compared to the bride. So what's the connection with that in mind to 2025 and this verse that actually has a numerical value of 2025 and a Motzi Shem Ra? Today, in the world, you see a lot of the same Motzi Shem Ra on Israel. There's a lot of slandering that's happening to the people of Israel in similar ways, that Israel is not faithful, that Israel is not a virgin, that Israel is not close to Hashem, that Israel is bad, and that Israel is committing, God forbid, whatever, a genocide, and that there's all this slandering. And I think there's a big connection here to what God is saying. We're talking about Judgment Day and the punishment for a Motzi Shem Ra, that God will take care of them. I think that's, to me, there's that symbolism of the verse having 2025, a value of 2025, specifically that those who slander Israel, who slander the daughter of Israel, they'll get their punishment. They'll pay their mea kesef, and they'll get what they deserve ultimately. So to me, I see it like that, as a connection to Israel being the bride of Israel. And it's precisely what we're studying now in the Daf Yomi in these days leading up to 2025. It's another interesting correspondence, confluence of events of what happens to those who slander the daughter of Israel. And after that, I said, okay, well, what other verses have 2025, have a numerical value of 2025? And there's 6 altogether in Tanakh. 6 verses in Tanakh that have a value of 2025. The first one that comes up is this one in Dvarim in Deuteronomy about the punishment for the slandering husband. And the last 2 are in Nehemiah and Divrei Yamim. And I'll leave those aside for now because they're more like in genealogical lists. But the next few are actually, the middle few are very interesting. The second one is in Shmuel. And I bring it up because we actually spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. In our Understanding Edom class, in the second one, we mentioned a person called Oved Edom Hagiti. You remember? Oved Edom Hagiti was somebody who merited to have the Ark of the Covenant in his home for 3 months. And it was when King David wanted to bring the Ark to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And as they were bringing the Ark to the Jerusalem, it hit a pothole and the Ark was about to fall. And then a man named Uzzah tried to grab it and he was electrocuted or something and was killed. And then King David got scared and they just parked the Ark of the Covenant nearby in the home of Oved Edom Hagiti. Literally means the servant of Edom, or an Edomite servant. That's what his name means. So we talked about that last time in relation to perhaps there's a connection to maybe Donald Trump as an Oved Edom about the Ark of the Covenant. Trump has in Mar-a-Lago a perfect replica of the Ark of the Covenant. I don't know if you remember that, but yeah, we talked about that a few weeks ago. So that verse as well, that they brought the Ark, Ve'yavo ad goren nechon ve'ishlach Uzzah el aron Elohim, that Uzzah grabbed the Ark of God, and he held it because it was about to fall. That verse itself has a value of 2025. So it's also interesting. I thought that was interesting because we just talked about this verse a few weeks ago in relation to Oved Edom and the world of Edom and what's happening right now in the world in relation to Edom and ancient prophecies of Edom. And the other two are in Tehillim. In Tehillim, there's two verses that have a value of 2025. One is in Psalm 139, where King David asks God to strike down the wicked, get them all away, help the righteous strike down the wicked. And the second one is in Psalm 149, which is, we read all the time, which we all know from our prayers. La'asot nekama b'goyim, tochechot b'leumim. That God will bring about, again, judgment day, and bring retribution upon the nations at the end of days, upon the wicked at the end of days. Psalm 149, read it all the time in our prayers. La'asot b'hem mishpat katuv adar, hu lechol chasidav, hallelujah, right? There's a whole string of hallelujah psalms at the end of the book, at the very end of Tehillim. So that verse, La'asot nekama b'goyim, that God's final, describing the final judgment day, when God will bring retribution upon all the nations of the world, if they so deserve it, that's also 2025. Psalm 149, verse 7. So all of these things are 2025. Hopefully that excites you for the year ahead. We have all these connections too, between Chanukah and restoring the lost light, and the year of the snake, and Sanhedrin, and the slandering, and the Rosh Chodesh Tevet, and the judgment, and the Psalms, and Oved Edom, and the Ark of the Covenant, and all these amazing things. Hopefully it's a sign of a very special year to come.